When there's stuff on the inside that has been so painful and so hurtful to you, and that you haven't acknowledged it, dealt with it, and integrated it, then at some point it has to show up. It has to reveal itself some way, somehow for resolution. And in my case, it was showing up in chronic pain in my head, in my knees, and in my back.
Hi, I'm Deevy, certified hypnotherapist and host of Stories from the Subconscious. I've come to realize that stories play an important role in shaping our subconscious minds. Each week, we hear the story behind what drove a hypnotherapist to try hypnosis for the first time, what it was like, and what was made possible for them as a result. So I invite you to get curious as we explore stories from the subconscious. Welcome back to Stories from the Subconscious. This is episode 17, and today we have a really special guest, Faye Lawand, and she joins us all the way from New Zealand. But as you'll hear as she shares her story, she's not originally from New Zealand. In fact, she was born in Lebanon during a time of civil war. So she was born during a time of conflict. And she described that that's a commonality between her and her parents and her grandparents, that they all have this shared experience of growing up amongst conflict. And this thread of conflict has now set the foundation for the work that Faye does. So she is an internal conflict resolution expert for busy professionals. And she describes the process that she had to go through in order to have her own self-realization journey. Because, after she left Lebanon and found refuge elsewhere, she found herself years later with all of this chronic pain and these chronic symptoms. She had chronic knee pain, chronic back pain, chronic headaches. Her digestion was poor. Her skin was bad. She was constantly sick. She had constant respiratory infections and bronchitis, etc. And she described, just how challenging it is to just be, to just show up when you are in chronic, constant pain. And for those of you who experience something similar of chronic, constant pain, I know that you know what that means, how hard it can be to show up and smile and, be joyful and experience the fullness of life when you're really experiencing the fullness of pain. So she describes that as her current state. And on top of that, her job turned to shit. Everything kind of came to a head. And that, of course, brought her to finally take a real look at herself. And that the story started to turn for her when she tried hypnosis for the first time. But I'll let you hear that story directly from her. These are just little tidbits to kind of get you excited. The story that she shares is so profound, and she has such a beautiful way of speaking, just a mastery of language. And the one message that really stood out to me as the overarching message, or if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's that our mind lives in our body. And our emotions, if not processed or resolved, can get locked. And oftentimes, those stuck emotions can then manifest as physical symptoms because they're trying to send a message through the body that something needs to be addressed. And Faye talked about 4 basic human needs, which I think is a really great way to start viewing the world. She describes these 4 basic human needs as the need to be seen, the need to be heard, the need to be acknowledged, and the need to feel as though you belong. And so what's amazing and beautiful about Faye's story is that she went from growing up in a war zone to now describing her work as a crusade to resolve internal conflict for her clients. And I love the imagery of the shift from a war zone to then a crusade. There's something really powerful about that imagery. And Faye gifted us at the end this beautiful practice to help you embody the felt sensation of well-being and safety, to really begin to shift your experience and work towards resolving any internal conflict that may be there. Because the truth is, even if we don't grow up in a war zone, we have some kind of internal conflict happening. I mean, we're humans. That is a part of life. So this beautiful practice at the end is absolutely worth sitting down, plugging in, and enjoying, because it is offering you the felt sensation of well-being and safety, which this whole conversation is around the embodiment, to really feel it in your body. It's not always enough to just think that you are safe or you are well. You really have to feel it. And with the feeling comes transformation. So I'm so excited to present to you Faye Lawand and her truly inspiring story of transformation. Well, my friends, such a blessing we have here today by the name of Faye Lawand, and I am so thrilled to have her here today. We have a little bit of a funny story in that we attempted to record this podcast once before, and the fate of the gods decided you're gonna want to do that again, and it's gonna be even better, and it's gonna be a beautiful synchronistic experience, and it's already proving to be synchronistic. So thank you so much, Faye, for being here.
What a pleasure, May. Thanks for having me. And I am of the believer the second time is always a charm.
2 is one of my favorite numbers,
yes,
so
yeah.
I will absolutely embrace that. Now, lucky for us, this is a podcast that is all about stories, and I am so thrilled to be able to be an audience to hear your story here today, because I know you have such a beautiful and wonderful story. You refer to yourself as an internal conflict resolution expert for busy professionals. And I can't help but wonder, when I come across, a labeling like that, I wonder to myself, well, they must have some type of story about internal conflict in order to be this expert, this internal conflict resolution expert. So if that is the opening to hear your story, then which it feels like it is, I'm going to hand it over. Let's hear. How does one become an internal conflict resolution expert?
Definitely, you don't kind of dream of it and aspire to it when you're 6 or 7 and you're at school and you're sitting in a circle and the teacher is going around asking you what you want to be when you grow up. I certainly never raised my hand and said I want to be an internal conflict resolution expert. That's right. Not the way it played out. But I think, as most of us know, especially when you're doing the type of work that we're doing, that we're so great, that we're so blessed to be doing, we come to this work as a result of our own life story and our own life story of our own life journey of difficulty and obstacle and challenge. And for me, that was the case. It was a lifetime of internal conflicts that basically caught up with me in a very, very, very real way. And life started to cave in around me. So just as a little backstory, I refer to it as internal conflict, but I was actually born into an actual zone of conflict, an actual area of conflict right before the start of the Civil War in Lebanon in 1975. And I know for those listening, it's hard to keep track of the troubles and the wars in the Middle East because it just seems like it's an area that is mired with conflict, troubles, chaos, struggle, and so on. And that's definitely the case. I mean, not only was I born into strife, chaos, struggle, and conflict, but so are my parents and my grandparents, my great grandparents. So it's a little bit of kind of like a generational experience and a generational theme, that experience of conflict and struggle and battle and chaos and stress and overwhelm. And so, so that war lasted from 1975 until about 1990. And like most wars, it was very bloody, and it claimed the lives of many hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions of others of families. And our family was in the statistic of those, the latter statistic, where we were able to leave the actual area of conflict pretty early on in the peace. But what I didn't realize until my life started caving in around me 35 years later is that even though I removed myself from the area of actual conflict, those patterns of internal conflicts followed me as my family and I moved from country to country, city to city, one part of the world to the other. And of course, just like with these internal conflicts, they're housed in the subconscious. We're not aware of them. But what we're aware of is our life not going the way we want it to be. So for about 35 years, every area of my life was not aligning to my desired outcomes and to my intentions. And of course, when that happens, when we're not getting what we want and we don't have access to the life experiences we desire with our conscious mind, that creates even more internal conflict on the inside, and it fuels what is already there that is draining and depleting the battery of life that will allow you to be, feel, do, have more of what you want. And so my health, it was health, career, and relationships that were really severely impacted during that journey of 35 years of not knowing what was going on underneath the surface. So my health in every possible way was falling apart, both physical health and mental health. And I had every possible diagnosis that you could think of when it comes to mental health. Generalized anxiety, depression, PTSD. And also what I did not know is I had raging adrenal fatigue. And for anyone that has experienced adrenal fatigue or any type of mental health challenge or any type of mental health issue, you will know that it's quite virtually impossible to experience joy, well-being, happiness, and possibility when there is so much mental health conflict and so much adrenal exhaustion and adrenal depletion. And that was pretty much my life. And so, my digestion suffered, my skin suffered. I was constantly sick and not knowing why I was constantly sick. I would get respiratory infection after respiratory infection, and I'd have to go on like rounds and rounds of antibiotics, and that would then just exacerbate the situation and then create even more depleting conditions to deal with. And of course, what I didn't know back then, what I now know, is that our mind lives in our body, right? And so as we experience emotions, human emotions that we don't process and we don't resolve, when a life situation is very overwhelming, those emotions are going to get locked in the nervous system, locked in the tissues of the body, locked in the systems of the body. And anything to do with the respiratory system, as you probably know from mind-body science, is all about unresolved emotions of sadness, grief, loss, and so on and so forth. And so it's not surprising that with so much unresolved sadness, that would show up in my lungs, and with constant colds, flus, and bronchitis issues. Also, chronic pain was rampant. So I had chronic headaches. And, when you have chronic headaches, and also I had chronic back pain and chronic knee pain. And when you are in physical pain, it is very challenging to embrace life and very challenging to be the way you want to be in life. And again, what I didn't know back then, but now is so commonsensical to me and is so obvious, that when there's stuff on the inside that has been so painful and so hurtful to you, and that you haven't acknowledged it, dealt with it, and integrated it, then at some point it has to show up. It has to reveal itself some way, somehow for resolution. And in my case, it was showing up in chronic pain in my head, in my knees, and in my back. And so that was on the health side, both physical health, emotional health, and mental health that was going down the tubes. But also my career was in shambles when things really started caving in around me. I initially was in a job that was highly toxic, highly stressful. And then eventually I was made redundant from that position. So, there I was, 40 years old with this, horrible health conditions. I was living in Dubai at the time in the Middle East. I was a single Arab woman in the middle of the Arab world, not married, no prospects, no kids, but also no secure career. And my relationships were also in shambles. It was impossible to keep a romantic relationship going. And all my primary relationships were not really meaningful and fulfilling. There was always some kind of conflict or unease in these primary relationships. Now, all of this came to a head. All of this, there was also the mind, because, the mind is always speaking to us through the body, isn't it, May? It's always speaking to us through the body. So all the chronic pain and the respiratory imbalances and the digestion issues and the PTSD and the anxiety and the depression, these were all symptoms of something underneath the surface. But like many, I didn't know how to read the signs. I didn't read the signs, and I didn't know how to read the signs because I did not know what I now know. And so I just kept going and going and going. And just because you keep going and you don't look, acknowledge, and address what's underneath the surface and creating the imbalance, it does not mean that that imbalance is not there. And it does not mean that that imbalance is not kind of like growing, fortifying, and creating an energy of its own on the inside. And of course, when these things create an energy of their own on their inside, they need fuel and energy to stay alive. And that fuel and energy comes from a sense of internal depletion, right? And this is why when we're so tired and burnt out and anxious, we feel like there is nothing left over for us, because there literally is nothing left over for us, because all of those symptoms need an energy to keep them alive on the inside. It's the vacuum law of prosperity, right? You need to create space for something good to come in. Of course, I didn't know about the vacuum law of prosperity back then. So eventually, not reading all of those signs for all those years, eventually I got a diagnosis of precancerous cells. Now, I had just turned 40. This was about 3 months after my 40th birthday. And I got a diagnosis of precancerous cells. And just the summer before, my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, and my maternal aunt had passed away from cancer. And so there was a rawness around that, but also there was a seed that was planted around the time of of my mom's diagnosis and my aunt's passing, that actually what happens on the inside can actually affect your physical health. I did not know that until my mom's diagnosis. Because when my mom was diagnosed, it was so shocking, and I wanted to find out more and educate myself more in order to prevent, that happening to me. And that was the very first time, May, that I actually came across the message that what happens in your mind and in your emotions can actually impact your physical body. It was the first time that I understood that mental and emotional toxicity can actually create physical toxicity, medical toxicity. I'd never come across that idea before in my life. And so the seed was already planted. And when I got my diagnosis shortly after I turned 40, that was a big waking moment for me. It's like, okay, obviously, there is something that is not right on the inside that is creating all of these imbalances on the outside. And at this point, Faye, you've got two choices. You either continue on the path that you're on. It's a road. It's a crossroads. And if you continue on the road that you're currently on, well, the outcome is pretty predictable, based on what you're seeing around you, or you carve out a new way and a new path for yourself. Now, the choice was pretty obvious, because I'm here now. And also back then, I loved life and I've always been a believer in life. Always, always, always. And I think that was part of the frustration, Maze, because I loved life so much and I believed in the potential of life, but I was so frustrated I couldn't access that potential within me. But obviously, when there's so much internal conflict, you can't access potential. I mean, you think about it, conflict and potential do not go hand in hand. Stress and calm don't go hand in hand. An overloaded nervous system doesn't go hand in hand with health and well-being. You've got to resolve that stuff in order to get the potential, the well-being, and the health. It's essential. I mean, that's the only way. But of course, back then, I did not know this, right? I had no idea how to do this. So the diagnoses back then, eventually I did go to see a talk therapist. It was talk therapy, medication, and surgery. Now, all three options were really options for me. I mean, I realized that there was a place for them and they were necessary as, a short-term solution. But I realized that that wasn't a long-term pathway to potential health and well-being. But I didn't know what would be. That's the thing. But there was a voice inside of me that said, this is not for you. But I didn't know what would be. I set out to figure it out for myself. And it was, because when I said no to those external solutions, I knew I was looking for a solution that was easy and quick, that was natural. When something is natural, we know it has no side effects. We also know that when something is natural and easy, it actually works and it's also good for you. And when something is natural and easy, it's also pretty quick. The results are quite quick and the results are quite painless. But for me, medication, talk therapy, and surgeries did not fit. Didn't check off those. Didn't tick off the boxes. I didn't know what would. No system to follow, no guidance, no support, no coach, no mentor. So I set out to figure it out for myself. Eventually, this is where hypnosis comes into play. So I tried it all. I did the yoga and the yoga philosophy, the meditation, the yoga nidra, the naturopathy, the qigong, the Western medicine. I did it all. The NLP, the CBT, and all of it definitely provided benefit. Definitely, and it definitely provided improvement, and I could see improvements. But there was still something on the inside that didn't feel right and didn't feel aligned. There was still a sense and a feeling of limitation, even though my symptoms were starting to clear and I was starting to feel a lot better. Eventually, when the intention is there, May, when we set out an intention for ourselves, to do something that is right for us and that is to our benefit, and that we know what we want it to look like, even though we don't know how we'll get there. I don't know, something around us conspires in order to open up paths and roads and possibilities for that to happen. So I think that power of intention definitely was at play in my life, like it is at play in everybody else's life. And I heard about this thing called hypnosis. Now, I had never heard of hypnosis. I think I had seen it, in movies. And like many of our clients now, when they just hear we do hypnosis, it's like, oh my God, you're going to knock me out and you're going to, use a pendulum and I'm not going to remember what I say. And that was pretty much my conception of hypnosis. But a friend of mine explained that hypnosis allows you a portal to the subconscious mind, and it's a subconscious mind that is the storehouse for all your life experiences, emotions, thoughts, belief patterns, life memories that are creating or responsible for whatever you're having or not having in your life. And that made so much sense to me. And I thought, okay, why not? Because at this point, I was so much in trial and error mode, trying to find a solution that would tick all of those boxes for me. So I gave it a shot. So I booked in for my first session. And I went in, and the therapist, did what, we do for our clients. She instructed after she got me into trance. She instructed my subconscious mind to go back to the very, very, very first time that was responsible for all the current internal conflicts in my life. To go back to the very first time that was limiting me from being, doing, feeling, having what I currently want in my life. And at the time, what I mean is at the age of 40. So that's what my mind did, like all minds do, because all of us can go into hypnosis, all of us, because it's such a natural state. So my mind went back to the time when I was 5 years old, so 35 years earlier, when I was 5 years old, and we were fleeing the war zone in Lebanon. And my dad wasn't with us because he was caught outside the country. The airport had shut down, and it wasn't safe for him to return to help with the escape. And so it was my mom and myself, my younger brother, and my younger sister. Now, I was 5. I just turned 5. My brother, not even 5, actually. My brother was like not even 3, and my sister was like not even 1.5, and here's my mom, in her 30s, fleeing a war zone, leaving behind everything and everyone, and not knowing when she would be back. This was at the dark. It was pitch black. The escape happened at 2 a.m. And you can imagine what type of state she was in. And they chose a particular route, and they chose that time of night because somehow someone had told them that would be the safest time to do it in the middle of the night. Well, as we were fleeing the war zone on the way to the airport, there were bombs. Bombs started falling in the distance, and there were snipers overhead. So my mom, of course, in an attempt to keep us kids safe, what did she do? She pushed our heads underneath the seats of the car. Now, in that moment in time, this is all in hypnosis, right? I had no conscious awareness of this. So in hypnosis, then there was a real felt sense of panic, anxiety, and that feeling of stress and overload that the little 5-year-old experienced 35 years earlier. Now, when the therapist brought me out of trance and out of hypnosis, I completely dismissed that memory and that possibility that was stored in my mind as an explanation for where I currently was with all the limitations in my health, career, and my relationships. Because my thinking was back then, how could something that happened to me when I was 5, 35 years ago, such a long time ago, have any bearing on where I am right now? And of course, how could it not, right? Of course, now anyway, how could it not? And so when I left the doctor's office, I called my friend and I said, this is the biggest load of BS. And I told her the same thing. How could anything that happened 35 years ago explain why my life is in such a state? And that resistance remained for about 6 months until, again, intention at play in my life, right? I started hearing more and more and more evidence and success stories of people going through hypnosis. And I thought, you know what, let me give it another try. And then from there, the rest is history, because all the parts started to come together, and the healing was actually quite spontaneous, quite instantaneous after that. Quick, easy, rapid, natural, no side effect turnaround. My symptoms cleared very, very quickly with hypnosis, very, very quickly. And of course, at the time, I was still supporting the hypnosis with other practices that also support the nervous system, because that's really, really important. If you've had any type of a mental health challenge, all mental health challenge stems from an overload of the nervous system. So I was still working with nervous system support techniques, but that combination with the hypnosis really fast-tracked my results and my turnaround and my health, and then eventually my career and my relationships. Not much after that, I met the man of my dreams, got married, moved to New Zealand. Not long after that, I set up a business. Well, I went on to study, right? Obviously, I went on to do a lot of study, and I set up a business where, I feel I have a purpose. I feel my work is meaningful. I feel it's making a difference. And really, it feels like now all the pieces in my life have kind of come together, May. And I just turned 50 last year during lockdown. And I feel now that I'm happier, healthier than I ever have been in my life. And I attribute that 100% to resolving those internal conflicts at the level at which they were created, which is at the level of the subconscious and the level of the nervous system.
Wow, there is so much to be said about that story. I have the pleasure of seeing you on camera right now, and I just will say that Faye is glowing. Glowing. It's wonderful. And, I also have the benefit of seeing that on the back of her wall are like a dozen framed certificates. So clearly you have done so much work, and I can hear all of that, coming through you recounting your story. And, I one thing that comes to mind, which is a question that I'm asking with the intention of showcasing how we might be able to pivot the way that we look at things, because the truth is that we're all going to experience some kind of conflict in our lives in some way, shape, or form. At some point, it's going to happen. Maybe it's as small as, do we choose the oak wood bed frame or the dark walnut stain? Whatever the conflict is, or something much more intense and serious like what it is that you described. But knowing what it is that you know now, and having all the wisdom that you have now, what do you say was the positive intention of you experiencing that conflict, or the experiences of conflict, because it's not just one, but
thanks for that, May. So a couple of things there. So all 7 billion of us on the planet, by virtue of having a human body and a human experience, are going to encounter internal conflict, whether we're aware of it or not. Because really, internal conflicts are things like negative emotions. We all experience negative emotions as human beings. Just because you're not aware of it and acknowledging it, it does not mean the negative emotions are not there. So internal conflict can be, a limiting belief. We all experience limiting beliefs. It could be an outdated pattern of thinking that needs to be, adjusted. It could be a fear or a phobia. It could be values that are out of line, or it could be a trauma, or it could be, a childhood experience or a childhood memory that hasn't been integrated. And we will all, 7 billion of us, experience those by virtue of being born human and by virtue of our human journey. Now, here is my explanation on why that is. And my belief is that internal conflicts provide us the opportunity for breakthrough and provide us the opportunity for growth. Because when things are going smoothly and steadily, there isn't much momentum or impetus for growth, is there? We definitely need periods of, smooth sailing and ease and well-being, but that's not where we tap into our internal resources and really grow and flourish. It is as we're overcoming something, as we're working through something, as we're going through something, that the internal resources develop and helping us, being a tool in resolving the internal conflicts. So internal conflicts will be with us as long as we have a human life journey, a human experience. And I do believe that they are the portal to embodying our full potential.
The portal to fully embodying our full potential.
Because my slogan actually is from internal conflict to full potential, right? I mean, it is as you resolve your internal conflicts, you embody your full potential. And it's important to clarify what we mean by embody. Not knowing, because we all know, we read, we have an intellectual idea that we're whole, we're healthy, we're well, we're resilient. But if you don't feel it, and I hear it a lot from the clients that I work with, burnt out, stressed out, traumatized, anxious, depressed clients whose nervous system is an overload. They know their life is good. They know they have a lot to be grateful for. But they don't feel it. They know that life is providing them with a lot of opportunity, but they don't feel good enough. And now you're not going to feel those things if there's all that stuff underneath the surface that's depleting from those vital life experiences. Again, it's the vacuum law of prosperity. You need to create space for the good. And internal conflicts will delete and deplete the good. So you've got to move the internal conflicts to make space for something else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's oftentimes something that I discuss with my clients when we're dealing with limiting beliefs or conflicts or whatever it is that we're looking to work through or resolve or just get rid of. When we do, we create space for what it is that we do want, because it's taking up space. And I liked the analogy that you talked about earlier, that, these things, they need to be fed, which takes energy, right?
Yeah.
So of course you're tired or you're exhausted.
Yeah.
You're feeding something that, is maybe bigger than you in a certain way. Of course it's not, but in a certain way it might feel that way.
This is all happening at a subconscious level, right? Of course, you're not willing it to happen. Of course, you're not creating it. Of course, you don't want it to happen. It's your mind doing it for you. And this is happening underneath the surface. But a central message that I keep coming back to over and over and over again is, just because you're not aware that it's there, and just because you're not aware that this is going on underneath the surface, it does not mean that it's not happening.
Gosh. And I would imagine for someone who doesn't have the awareness, or maybe doesn't even believe it, that might be a hard pill to swallow.
Yep.
But what I do think is not debatable, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before, is that, what is the reason behind us experiencing pain? Or, I heard you describe chronic pain. You had your adrenal fatigue, anxiety, and things like that. What is the reason? And sometimes we don't think about these things, but when we do pause to welcome in some of that awareness of, why am I feeling this pain? Well, our body doesn't have a mouth and a linguistics and words to express. Pain is a form of communication. And, I'll put the question out there. What do you think the body is trying to communicate when it's signaling pain?
Yeah, well, it's the mind. So it's the mind communicating through the body, right? Spot on that the mind, because the mind is always speaking to us, isn't it? Because the mind's number one directive is to keep us safe and to keep us alive, right? Like, that is its number one sole responsibility, or its primary responsibility, right? And therefore, it will always be on the lookout for what's not right, what's perceived as threatening, what's perceived as unsafe, what's perceived as not good for us, and will send us signals in order for us to realign. Now, as you said, it is not going to communicate linguistically with words, phrases, and sentences that our conscious mind can comprehend. But again, just because it's not using linguistics to communicate with us in a comprehensible way, it does not mean that it's not communicating with us in another way, in a subconscious way, through sensations, through imbalances, through all of those limitations that we're experiencing in our lives. So I always look at chronic pain as a symptom of internal conflict. PTSD is a symptom of internal conflict. Insomnia is a symptom of unresolved internal conflict. Depression, anxiety, they are a symptom of unresolved internal conflict, because your body cannot tell you, Faye, May, you haven't paid attention to something that happened to you when you were 5. You haven't cleared, the aftermath of a breakup. You haven't looked at how you were conflicted between your freedom and with making money on your job. It can't do that with comprehensible words, languages, and phrases, but it will send you those symptoms through bodily experiences and mind experiences. So those are just symptoms. They're simply messengers. But if we don't know, if we don't know that and we don't know how to read the signs, A, we miss them. B, they continue and they grow and they intensify and fortify underneath the surface. And then C, we continue with an experience of self-limitation and a lack of access to our embodied full potential.
Faye, we talked about synchronicities in the fact that, you and I attempted to record this podcast episode previously and, the audio disappeared and floated away. And Faye was so wonderful and gracious. And she showed up today saying, well, there's a reason why that happened, which, by the way, is a beautiful mindset and a beautiful story to have, because we could be angry, right? We could have a conflict about it, you and I, and create some, tension. But why bother? Isn't it more enjoyable to look at it as an opportunity? But that's not necessarily my main point. What I wanted to say, what I wanted to link up is this interesting synchronicity that I have been coming into my body more and beginning to really recognize and acknowledge my body as a messenger, as something that is more than just the thing that gets me from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So honoring my body a little bit more, which I think is a wonderful practice. And I've had a few moments of experiencing some pain. Like I had some cramps the other night. And I'm like, wow, I really don't experience cramps very often. I'm like, I don't know necessarily why this is happening, but okay, breathe through it. And as funny as it sounds, I have tried something new. And so I'm curious if this is something that is a part of your practice. I know you have so many offerings that you offer to your clients, but I started to talk to the pain and I thanked the pain for showing up. And I said, I hear you. And I acknowledged it as a communicator. And, I said, I'm listening. Thank you. I love you. I'm listening. Thank you. I love you. I'm listening. Something of that sort. And I just kind of kept repeating it. And, eventually the pain kind of went away. But it was a really interesting and very different for me. This is not something that I have done historically in my life, but I am stepping into a place where I welcome that because it's a conversation to be had. And there's going to be moments of pain. There are. It's just realistic. You're going to stub your toe. Something's going to happen. I'm not saying that it's destined to, but more than likely, there's going to be something. And what if we accepted it as merely a form of communication?
Yeah.
And therefore, like you would an aunt showing up to your door, what would you say when you answer the door? You say, thank you. Oh my God, thank you for coming. Anyone who would arrive to your door, you would thank them for being there and maybe ask them what they want. And more than likely, they would have a response.
What you're describing reminds me of one of my favorite poems from Rumi called The Guest House. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but I'd like to be.
What I will do is I can link. I'll send you the poem to include. But basically, the premise is what you're describing. That everything that arises, whether it's a physical symptom that shows up like pain, or even an emotional sensation that shows up maybe as emotional pain, those are simply guests that are showing up that have a message to communicate to us about an aspect of our life. They're simply there as a message to let us know about something that we need to stop doing, start doing, continue doing in order to get us back to that place of alignment within our lives. And when we embrace that attitude of likening them to someone showing up at your door and making that person feel welcome, you have the experience that you just described where it won't resist anymore, because we know that old saying, what we resist persists, right? And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that metaphor around energy. Those internal conflicts require energy, and that energy will have to come from somewhere. And so when we don't resist what's there and we just kind of make it feel welcome, then its innate wisdom will be processed and integrated. And there will be no longer any reason for it to be sounding the alarm bell for you to notice it and notice the hidden message. Does that make sense, eh?
It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. And I'm reflecting back on, this night just 2 or 3 nights ago. I mean, I had terrible menstrual cramps, and I typically have a very almost unnoticeable menstruation cycle. It's almost just, okay, yeah, it's happening, but life continues. And I had the kind of cramps that prevented me from sleeping, that I started to think, do I need to start thinking about going to the hospital? They were so intense. And so I started to speak to them, though, and they, then all of a sudden I found myself waking up the next day. I fell asleep, and then I woke up and it was the morning, and I was like, oh, okay. I almost forgot that whole thing happened really until this conversation, if I'm being honest.
Isn't it amazing, how these things work? I came across one of the practices that I adore and that I incorporate a lot into my work is the practice of somatic experiencing, somatic sensing, and also all the tools from IREST, integrative restoration. And there's a premise there around there are basically 4 human needs that we all have. And absence of those 4 human needs, we're going to experience it in terms of something on the inside or on the outside. And those are the need. We all have a need to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, and to belong. And so while this is true of us as individuals, this is also true of our internal sensations and our internal experiences, because they also have a need to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and to feel like they belong. And when you approach it the way that you did, by not rejecting them, that's the belonging, by acknowledging them, by letting them know that it's okay to be there, then they'll do what basically they were intended to do, which is just flow through you and to somehow unconsciously integrate the wisdom behind them.
So wild.
And again, it happens underneath the surface. It's we're not conscious of this, and just because we're not conscious of it, or we can't, understand it consciously, or we don't want to understand it consciously, it does not mean that that's not a process that is very much alive and at play in your life and in your physiology and your psychology.
Absolutely. What you're saying makes so much sense. And I mean, the truth is that we know that when we go to bed, our brain also does not go to bed. There is no off button.
Yeah.
There is no sleep mode for the brain. It's always on. I mean, it's actually amazing if we really think about it, that it never is off.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it's absorbing everything always, right? And this is why, you and I are here to have this conversation, talking about the stories that we tell ourselves and the things that happen to us that then inspire the stories that we tell ourselves. The brain is always listening. It's always feeding off of these stories. And so what I hear from you is that we have the option to redirect that energy and to shift the storytelling so that we can have what it is in our minds that we want. We can claim what feels good. We can step out of a place of pain or conflict and step more into what feels good for you.
Yes. And also, again, when you practice a spirit and an attitude of welcoming and inquiring, like you did, you are switching off, muting the internal conflict because you're not fighting with it. There's no battle. It is what it is. It's there because it belongs there in that moment in time. And as you lend your awareness to it, and maybe like you did, engage it in a proactive conversation, eventually it will reveal its wisdom to you and it will dissipate.
Yes. I'm smiling because you brought up this beautiful analogy, referring to this battle, and it is very warlike to think about internal conflict or, to think about conflict. That is war, right? That is
Totally.
the definition of war, is that there is a conflict there.
Conflict, yeah.
And so, but there is something so brave about waving the white flag. And I'm not sure if that's like the best analogy in terms of starting to talk to the parts that have pain or to acknowledge it, these 4 basic human needs. I'm not sure if it's a surrendering of a white flag, because it really is such a brave act, but there is something very brave about putting that white flag up, being that first person to say, okay, let's work towards a resolution.
And let's do something differently, because obviously the path of conflict, avoidance, rejection, fighting, it hasn't worked for a resolution. Let's try something different. So there's a different intention, isn't there? So you're just coming to it now with a totally different intention. And we know, as hypnotherapists, we see this all the time in our practice, that intention is basically half of the change work, because when you have a clear intention about what you want and why you want it, then the mind goes to work on supporting that intention. This is why it's so important to really be very mindful of what thoughts we put in our mind and what ideas and what we allow as truth inside our minds, because the nature will go to work on it on your behalf. It doesn't know that you don't want it. It doesn't know the difference between real and imaginary. So as you're practicing positive intention living or positive intention defining, then your mind is supporting those positive intentions, because that's one of the I don't want to say the laws of the mind. That's one of the ways in which the mind operates. Operating guidelines. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes, the operating guidelines. One thing that really stuck out to me about what you just said is, what is it that you're allowing in as truth? And I think that is a wonderful operating guideline to just kind of check in. Is this truthful? I'm not worthy of love. Is that true?
Is that true?
Is that true? Do they think it's true? Do you think it's true?
On that note of checking in with truth and what we allow in as truth, this is one of the reasons why I'm on a massive crusade around mindful consumption of technology, social media, news, but particularly, at all times, but particularly during those hypnagogic times during alpha state wave activity, right before sleep and right upon awakening, because when we are in that very suggestible space, whatever we allow in, the mind accepts as truth, right? We use that state in hypnosis in order to rescript the way a memory is stored and the way an outcome will play out in our lives. And so we have access to that very natural state at least twice a day. But what most of us do is we misuse that, we abuse that time by presenting to our consciousness and our awareness truths which are very stimulating, which are very depleting, and which are very externalizing. Because when you are scrolling, or when you're checking emails, or when you're listening to the news, or when you're watching something on TV right before you sleep or right after awakening, immediately you're outside yourself. Immediately you are consuming the thoughts, the emotions, the images, and the agenda of someone else. Immediately.
And just to say it in another way, that you're in a trance.
You're totally, you're hypnotizing yourself. You're hypnotizing yourself towards negative outcomes and negative feelings.
You bring up such a powerful point. And I mean, gosh, there could be a whole entire podcast episode on
Let's do
that.
it. I'm on a crusade. I probably shouldn't use the word crusade. That's probably not the best. On a mission. Let's say mission. Very, very.
Well, the crusade is kind of interesting for you in this story that you have. You're like Joan of Arc, and that you like emerged from this conflict, this war zone, and so in a way you are on a crusade. You have kind of reclaimed the war zone, and you've made it yours. And you're like, I am on a crusade. Here's my story, and here's the truth. It's a very beautiful metaphor.
Appropriate, It's appropriate, yes. I guess. And also, I'm from the part of the world where crusades were happening, the Middle East. I mean, Israel, the irony of the situation is, Lebanon and Israel are sworn enemies, but the place of Jesus's crucifixion was only like 50 kilometers from where I was born. So you're very, very, very close geographically.
There's a lot of beautiful symbolism there. Gosh, you've shared so much beautiful truth with us today, and so many interesting ways to look at things like pain as a communicator, and like our mind as sponges in a way, and to be super mindful of what it is that we're feeding our minds. In that, we do go into a trance state with any screen. I mean, we all know that. If you have ever tried to talk to someone who is playing a video game, you know.
They're totally in a trance.
Right. They are totally, totally in a trance. And so it's an interesting practice to witness yourself in that seat and ask yourself, are these truths? Are these truths that I want to welcome in? It's an interesting question.
And truth to define my reality and define my focus.
Yeah, truths at my core. Do these align with my core values, my core truths?
And if the answer is yes, continue doing them.
Sure. Right.
But I suspect the answer would be no. That's why there's an internal conflict. Then you've got a choice to do something different. Because we always have a choice, don't we? Always.
Yes, we do always have a choice. And that can either be very freeing or imprisoning, depending on how it is that you look at it, and depending on what choice it is that you continue to make.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could have a whole other podcast episode on that topic.
Let's do that as well.
But Faye, what I would love to inquire is if you would be willing to share some of your beautiful expertise and knowledge and skills with us in a brief hypnosis practice of some sort, or some sort of mindfulness practice. I don't know what you've got in that bag of yours.
With pleasure, May. So I will share with you a practice to help you embody the physiology and the psychology of well-being. Because what we were talking about earlier, it's not just enough to know that you are well, or to know that you are enough, or to know that you are safe. If you don't feel it as a felt sense inside yourself, it's not going to create the type of improvement or shift in your life experience. And so in my process of internal conflict resolution, when I work in the clinic with my clients, I'm always looking at helping them embody the felt sensation of an internal resource that will allow resolution of the internal conflict. And so that's what I'd like to guide you through, to give you a little sampler and a little taste in that. And maybe we'll just anchor you to the internal resource of safety and well-being. Because that's a pretty good generic one, and especially in today's time and age, and where there's so much uncertainty around us, I think those are resources that we can all benefit from amplifying and fortifying internally.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
Wonderful.
Before I hand it off to you completely, our beautiful disclaimer that if you are, of course, driving a car or some complex machinery or doing anything that it would be unsafe to have your eyes closed, then give this a pause, or pause what you're doing and surrender yourself completely to this moment. So long as you are safe, then we can proceed with this beautiful practice. So
thanks for the reminder of the disclaimer, May. And so you can do this either lying down or sitting up. And you could do this either with your eyes partially shut, totally shut, or just with lowering the gaze, whatever feels comfortable for you during these initial moments of this practice and of this session. So just take a moment or two to get comfortable. And as you're allowing the body and the body and the mind to settle, just please feel into where you're sitting or where the body is positioned. And notice the positioning of the body, either on the surface behind it or the surface underneath it, or both. Feeling the supports that are provided to the body now. Lean into the support. Allow the awareness of where your body is right now and the supports provided to the body to assist you in internalizing your awareness and become more present of what is here and what is now. Please just become aware that the body is breathing for you. Become aware of that which basically keeps you alive, respiration. And maybe as you're noticing that the body is breathing for you, maybe affirming, reminding yourself that just because you're not aware of the body inhaling and the body exhaling, it does not mean that that's not happening underneath the surface. And it does not mean that there isn't something there that's keeping you alive in this moment and every moment in time. Allow your senses to be wide open. So just allow sights and sounds to come to you. I realize the eyes are closed, so maybe in terms of sights, or closing. So maybe in terms of sights, it could be what's that dark velvety curtain behind the closed eyes, or particles of brightness or symbols or patterns behind the closed eyes. There could be even sensations behind the closed eyes. Allow sounds to come to you, sounds from the distance, sounds from outside the area where you're practicing, sounds inside the room, sounds inside the body. Just allow those sounds to take you deeper into this moment and deeper into this process of internalization. Become aware of any aromas around you, on you, or next to you. And again, just allow that awareness of the aromas to take you deeper inside yourself. Awareness of what tastes are there inside the mouth. These could be actual tastes or residual tastes. Then allowing the awareness of tastes inside the mouth to take you deeper into presence, deeper into the present moment. Attention and awareness to the physical body now. Becoming aware of sensations in the body or off the body. Could be feelings of heaviness somewhere, coolness, tightness, lightness, tingling, warmth. Just allow the mind to wander and allow the mind to settle on sensations that are happening underneath the surface. And allowing the awareness of the sensations underneath the surface to connect you even deeper with what's underneath the surface. And with a sense of support, with a sense of widening, expanding awareness, connecting to an intention of well-being and safety. Just the intention is enough for now. And then maybe bringing to mind a time, a place, an object, a person. It could even be a pet, or it could be an imaginary situation where you felt really just, okay, really okay, just really well, really, really fine. And again, I remind you, this could be an imaginary picture inside your mind, or it could be an actual picture involving a time, a place, or a person. And then just allow that picture to be present inside your mind. And just really allow the senses to hone in on that picture and to really engage in that picture so that you're really seeing and noticing everything about that time, that place, that person where you felt well, okay, safe. Seeing everything that you see in that picture inside your mind. And hearing everything that you can hear inside that picture, inside your mind. And you're feeling okay, well, and safe. Really noticing all the smells that are associated with that picture, with that time, that place, or that person. And notice if there are any tastes. Really allowing the mind to amplify and to strengthen and really vivify all the sights, the sounds, the smells, and the tastes. And then dropping inside the body and noticing the body, really inquiring, what is the feeling inside the body when I bring to mind an idea of wellness, well-being, and okayness? How does that feel inside the body? Really notice the physiology of wellness and well-being inside yourself. Where you're feeling those sensations, what those sensations might be, and how those sensations behave. And as you're continuing to focus your awareness on your individual physiology of well-being and okayness, please just allow the mind to let go of that picture from earlier on. So let go of the idea and just remain focused on the physiology, on the felt sense of well-being and okayness in the body. Really allowing those sensations to grow, to flourish, to spread. Allow those sensations to intensify. And allow those sensations of the physiology of well-being to cover the whole body-mind, so that every part of your physical body, all your organs, your muscles, your tendons, your tissues, all the DNA is infused with this feeling of well-being, with your individual blueprint of what it feels like to be well and okay. And just like with everything else, the more you recall, the more you practice connecting with this physiology of well-being, with this physiology of okayness, the more this physiology of okayness will become your default. And the more it will support a psychology of well-being and okayness. Because the mind and the body are one. The body always speaks to the mind, and the mind always speaks to the body. And as the body begins to accept and live out this physiology of wellness and well-being, the mind will also take that on board and work to make that happen as a reality inside yourself. With the connection to this internal resource, to this individual physiology of wellness, well-being, and okayness, can you project out to a time in the future? Just see yourself at a future time really embodying this feeling of well-being and okayness. And notice what it's like to do life, to be in life, but to do life and be in life with this deep connection, with this deep felt sense, knowing of well-being and wellness. Notice what's different when you embody this physiology of wellness, trust, and well-being. And then with that connection, knowing that the future is always created in the present moment, and with that vivid mind and body experience of the physiology of well-being and okayness, when you're ready and the eyes open to a more familiar state of awareness, you will do so while looking out into the world with this newfound connection to a felt sense of wellness, well-being, and okayness. And the eyes will only open up when that connection has really been established. And then when the eyes do open up, you'll notice that you'll come back feeling really grounded, really well, really integrated, really, really balanced, and really feeling better than you have all day and all week.
Oh, Faye, I know as I'm coming back and rejoining you, understanding that there may be those who are listening who are still working their way out of this beautiful phase as they're allowing all of that to sink in so deeply. That was so wonderful and beautiful and simple and yet profound. What struck me was the future is always created in the present moment. That was very striking to me.
Isn't it true? The future is a present construct. This is why it's so important to practice presence of mind.
Yeah, that one really struck me. I'm gonna chew on that one for a little while. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. I actually always throw it in at my hypnosis sessions with my clients, and yeah, it does get their attention. Again, somebody did it with me once, and it was like, oh, okay, it was like a real it's so true, but it really, really opened my eyes and brought me back to the present moment.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that was useful.
Yes, and what a beautiful way to perhaps summarize our whole conversation. What I'm taking away from this is, you are a wonderful example of translating internal conflict and shifting that into internal resources. As I see you as someone who's so wonderfully resourceful, with so many skills and so much wisdom and so much beauty as well.
Thanks, Maya.
And to be sharing that, your story could have gone so many different routes, is basically what I'm trying to say. And you have taken it to choose a resourceful route, an empowered route. And you're also now turning that around and offering that same option up to others. Sometimes we need someone to increase that awareness, to point us in a direction. And I just want to say thank you.
It's such a pleasure, May. It's such a pleasure. Thank you very much for providing me and others with a platform to share these powerful stories from the subconscious and of the subconscious and about the subconscious, because the subconscious is immensely powerful, as we know. So thank you very much for creating this platform for sharing and for discussion.
Oh, so wonderful. I hope that you are leaving this conversation feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling acknowledged, and feeling like you belong. I know that I have my needs being met And
I'm
so I
so
just want to
pleased.
thank you. Yes. And Faye, please share with us if we want to connect with you, or if we want to work with you, how can we find you on this magical internet?
Thanks for asking. So it's just really simple. It's just my name, Faye Lawand. So think as Lawand, like the wand, magic, because that's what this process is all about, connecting you with your internal magic to feel more of what you want. So it's just faylawand.com, and also all my handles on social media are by the same name, Faye Lawand. So LinkedIn, YouTube, Insight Timer, Instagram, and Facebook, of course.
Amazing. So we have so many ways that we can connect with you.
And I would love to hear what landed with you and how this landed with you, and answer any questions you might have about internal resourcing and internal conflict resolution.
Amazing. And Faye, answer me this, and I don't know the answer. Do you also work bilingually?
Good question. It's a really good question. Yes and no. I mean, I definitely speak Arabic, and I also speak French, and I speak some Spanish. My dominant language is English. However, I work with a lot of people who speak many different languages. And when I speak with people who speak languages that I don't speak, especially when we're at regression, because language is emotion, right? So when clients go back to a time when they're, anytime under 7, I give them the option to have that internal conversation in their mother tongue and in their mother language. And any gestalting that we do happens in their mother tongue, their mother language. I don't need to know what they're saying. I mean, I don't really need to know what they're saying. It's the intention, right? It's that closure, that experience for it to happen internally, but to happen in the language that their emotional mind was programmed.
Wow. That was so much more of an answer than I was expecting. And I'm just continue to be so impressed by you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. We can even have a chat about that another time.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we've got already 4 other podcast episodes lined up for us.
You know where to find me.
Perfect. Awesome. That's right. We do know where to find you, Faye. Thank you so much for your inspiring story of just
pleasure,
the kinds of possibilities that are available to us, even when facing the hardest of conflicts.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks again, May. And lovely to connect as always. Second time is a charm, eh?
Yeah,
third time might be even better.
Thank you so much, Faye.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Stories from the Subconscious. I know the thing about stories is that they can't possibly be as impactful if they're not shared. So please share this episode, give us a review, let us know what resonated most, because you never know who you may help in the process. Until next time, storytellers, stay curious.